Welcome to the Sober Nation FM podcast, where we're putting recovery on the map. I'm your host, Jonathan Sylvester. This show is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Do you want to take your recovery to the next level? Do you want more support, community, and fellowship? Sobriety Engine is an incredible community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. You can get a ton of great tips, resources, and guidance to help you succeed in recovery and in life. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. Sober Nation FM is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle, all while supporting your sobriety, then you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Nation, let's hop right into today's episode. Today, I'll be speaking with journalist, author, and former comedian Amy Dresner. Thanks for joining me today, Amy.
Hi, Jonathan. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And I want to hear all about your book and your new podcast we were just talking about. But first, I'd really like to start off just by asking a little bit about what things were like before getting sober and how you found recovery. So could you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, of course. It was really bad. I was kind of a late bloomer. I started drinking around 19, but at 24, I found crystal meth. And that was, like a 2-year battle that landed me in treatment for the first time. Nothing like staying up for 17 days and writing a new Bible. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I was like, okay, like this might not be working. It's not, I don't know if meth is going to make me that functional. And then, I would get time and relapse, years and relapse.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, and things escalated as they always do. So like I ended up like learning, I got into cocaine after meth gave me full-blown epilepsy, which I still have. But I have all my teeth, and that's all that really matters in LA. Hi. So it doesn't matter. Who cares if my brain's fried,
Yeah, exactly.
Like I have good hair. That's what matters.
There you go.
No, I'm on medication for that, and it's been a fucking nightmare. And I've cracked my head open, and I've lost my license twice, and broken teeth, and it's been really bad. But after I got sober for a while, I didn't want to touch crystal again because I was like, well, that's made with gun bluing and Drano, and so I'm going to use cocaine because that's natural. So then I started.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes
sense.
to me.
I mean, I know
it
makes sense. All right. I totally right. So then, of course, I ended up back in treatment, again, and then I started shooting cocaine because, like, why waste money and time? Let's get to where we're going. Let's be efficient.
Yeah.
And it was just 25 years of relapse and suicide attempts and psych wards and abusing everything from Oxy to Four Loko. Hi, I'm classy. To everything. I cannot use anything in moderation at all. And so finally, I was in a not so great marriage, and because I married someone because I thought they were going to fix me and take care of me, which is always a great reason to marry somebody. And I relapsed in that marriage on Oxycontin I was given for a shoulder injury.
Okay.
And I was like, well, I don't like Oxy. I don't like downers. Like I'm an upper, it'll be fine. And it's never fine. It's like whenever that, that veil went up between me and reality. And I was like, oh yes, I don't care. I don't care about anything. I love this. I don't care about what you think. I don't care about what I think. I don't, And on December 25th, Christmas of 2011, things got really out of control and physical, and I pulled a knife on him. He called the cops, and I went to jail for felony domestic violence with a deadly weapon.
Wow.
And that was sort of the end of, that was the end of that marriage. And and also the beginning of my journey into this recovery, and now I have over 7 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I lost everything. I was left penniless in a psych ward. I went back to treatment. I relapsed. I went to sober living. I relapsed. And then I finally got into a sober living for about 2.5 years and was going through a divorce and a criminal trial. But what really changed my life was the community, was the court-ordered community labor.
Okay.
I had to sweep trash and syringes and cigarette butts and human feces on the sidewalk for 240 hours.
What was it about that
Um,
kind of changed things
so
for you,
this
do you
is
think?
all in the book, and it's funny, but at the time I was like, oh, this is horrible. I was 42 years old and I'm
Hmm.
in sober living and I'm on medical disability and I have no money and I'm newly sober again and I'm a divorcee with a
Yeah.
criminal record, and I'm like,
Hmm.
this is not good at all. And what it was that number one was like everything that I thought could never happen to me happened to me.
Hmm.
Everything that I thought I was immune to because I was, grew up in Beverly Hills or came from money or was highly educated. You know what I mean? All that shit went out the window. I mean, everything that I thought would, happen to other people, all of it happened to me. And so I just was on, it was me on a chain gang with like 40 Hispanic guys. And they were like, what you here for, Weta? I'm in for a DUI. What you here for? And I was like the only girl, the only white girl.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'm here for felony domestic violence with like a deadly weapon. They were like, oh shit,
Yeah.
It was like,
Yeah.
so I quickly realized like I was the criminal and I was worse than anyone else. Very few people were there for assault. And I remember sweeping the streets. It was like 8 hours a day. It was really, really hot and
Mm.
really exhausting. And I just had an epiphany. And I was just like, at first I was feeling really sorry for myself. I was like, fuck the police and fuck my ex-husband and my
Yeah.
lawyer sucked and this isn't fair. And then I went, you know what? This is the repercussions of all your actions. Like these are the consequences of your choices and your actions and the way you interact with the world. And I was like, this could be the best thing that ever happened to you. Or it could be the worst thing that ever happened to you. And like you get to decide which that is. And so I just decided like I was going to embrace whatever it was and find the lessons. And I did. And it was amazing. And I found compassion, I found a work ethic, I found humility. Um, I finished what I started. It shifted everything for me. And
Wow.
I've been sober ever since.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I want to ask, because you've said, and I think you just described that, you were a chronic relapser, right?
Correct.
And I think we hear that
25
term.
years. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear that term a lot in recovery. What do you think it was that finally clicked? I mean, I know you just described, having to do this community service type deal, and that taught you probably a little humility would be my guess. And it sounds like you did what I did, like started to take some responsibility, right? But what do you think it was that finally clicked for you?
I think that I realized that no one was going to do it for me. No one
Mm,
was going to save me. No one was going to take care of me. I had to make my own way in the world. I needed to grow up. Also, my I had to lose everything. I mean, I really did.
mhm.
And build it up again myself because there's no self-esteem when everything is given to you. You know what I mean? There's a sort of
Sure.
empty self-esteem. But when you build your own life and do things like writing the book or whatever, like things that I've accomplished for myself without any outside help, it's given me self-esteem as well as, being of service. But um, also everyone was over my shit. You know what I mean? Like
Mm,
everyone was over it. There was no
yeah,
more money. There was no more. My dad didn't speak to me for 2 months. My parents were like, we're tired of you at the bottom of the well, man. We're done.
sure.
You've drained us financially and emotionally for years. Like, get it together.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think that I just went, before that, I had been very sort of like, I'm a princess and people are going to take care of me. And like, you know
Hmm.
what I mean? And I didn't want to, I had a trust fund and then I married a rich guy. And then the universe was like, oh, you don't want to take care of yourself? Really? Okay, here,
Wow.
rock it out, honey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here you are on medical disability in a sober living in a shared room for 2.5 years. Enjoy.
Hmm.
And, babysitting and writing articles and just starting my life from scratch in my 40s. And it was gnarly.
Wow.
And I
Yeah.
was like, it was completely, I just woke up and grew up. And for me, that was a big part of getting sober, was just growing the fuck up.
Yeah. No, I hear that for sure. And I definitely, I mean, there's always, people talk about rock bottoms and then you hear the joke like, well, rock bottom is when you stop digging, right? And so it can always get worse. But Yeah, I hear you. I think a lot of us, and definitely for me, like I had to get to a point where there were no more options,
Yeah,
essentially. Like no one
exactly.
was going to be there
Exactly.
to bail me out again. And
Exactly.
I needed that. Like thank God
Yes.
people, were sick of my shit.
I mean,
Uh
people say like tough love doesn't work. I don't know. I don't know.
yeah.
I mean, I tried to kill myself at my friend's apartment. I was living with her when my husband kicked me out, my ex-husband. And then she wouldn't let me stay there anymore. Well, her brother
Hmm.
wouldn't. And so there was nowhere else to go. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? If I got kicked out of this sober living, there was nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I needed that desperation. And also, I guess, and it wasn't like this was the worst using I ever had. I was
Hmm.
just, I was taking pills and drinking. It wasn't when I was like shooting cocaine and having convulsions and wearing a bike helmet so I didn't hit my head, crack my head open. Like it wasn't like the worst using I had. The
Right.
criminal stuff wasn't terrific. That wasn't great. That was a
Hmm.
nightmare. And it got dropped to a misdemeanor. I did a year of domestic violence counseling and all my community labor, and it got dismissed. But I mean, like, I don't know if I can go to Canada. Like, I need to have my record expunged.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd
Still
like to
need.
go to Canada. People are like, why the fuck do you want? I'm like, no, I like Canadians. I like it. I want to go.
It might be a good time to take a little vacay if you could
You
actually
think?
get anywhere right
You
now.
think?
But
Hi.
yeah, anyway. So let me ask, I mean, so you do the community service deal and it sounds like the mindset starts to change a little
Yeah.
bit and you kind of get to this point where like you said you're growing up so to speak and what recovery wise where do things go from there?
Well, I had been in a prior to that for
Okay.
many, many years and had sponsors and sponsees.
Okay.
I got a new sponsor. I think what shifted for me, and I had done the steps and all that kind of stuff. I think what shifted for me was not my sponsor now, but the sponsor before had said, you don't have to act like a good person. You don't have to be a good person. You just have to act like one. No one knows the difference.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, like I'd been very about my feelings and my feelings had driven me. And I don't feel like doing that. And I don't want to do that. And I really started to act like the person I wanted to be. When I did my fifth step, I was like, oh, I'm a horrible human being. Like I
Yeah.
wasn't who I thought I was at all. I was like, oh, I'm entitled and lustful and violent and reactive and jealous. And I was like, yikes, I don't want to be that person. So I
Hmm.
started to act like the person I wanted to be, no matter how I felt, which is hard for us because we have very, very big feelings,
Yeah. Well, so
big, big feelings.
just
And
to
so,
touch on something specifically there. So you mentioned your fifth step. So, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like that was your more, or, one of your most recent, then at least fifth steps. Like, did you feel
yeah,
like when you did inventories in the past, like maybe you weren't as honest about stuff
I think
or?
I was honest. I mean, when I did this one, this was I don't know what changed. It was a
Okay.
different sponsor. It was more thorough.
Okay.
I had become a sex addict in sobriety, so I had like a huge sex inventory of just like gnarly stuff.
Okay.
I had all that baggage around my ex and the
Hmm.
criminal system, and uh I just was like, yeah, I mean, I realized I really wasn't who I thought I was.
Mm.
And I didn't like who I was. And I wanted
Yeah.
to change that. And so I started working on changing that and acting like the person I wanted to be. And, you know, when you take contrary action over and over and over again, you create a new neural pathway in your brain where that becomes your default mechanism. And then so it's not like fake it till you make it. It's like fake it till you become it. You actually become that other person. It's
Yeah.
becomes sort of who you are naturally, and so I
Yeah.
still, so it's like I started to get into the science. I started writing a lot and I started to really get into the science of the whole thing. But also I was in sober living. I was forced to like live with women and I didn't like women prior to that. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Because I'd been threatened by them and I hadn't been close to my mom. And so like everything shifted. Everything came together to kind of shift.
Okay.
And I
Yeah.
got like really, really humbled. And I don't know. I think that a lot of times we attribute it to sort of God or a higher power because we don't know what that click is. We
I
don't know
was
what
just
that shift
thinking
is.
that. Yeah,
We don't. If we could create that for everyone, we could get everyone sober. It's
for
so
sure.
different for everybody. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like, I could have gone through my sweeping experience and been like, fuck this sucks, my ex sucks, and the cops suck, and my lawyer, you know, that's not fair, I'm mentally ill, and I'm an addict, you know? And instead I went, oh, you know what? Like, my book opens and there's a quote from Will Rogers, and he's like, the worst thing that happens to you can be the best thing for you if you don't let it get the best of you. And I stumbled upon that after I write, and I was like, holy fuck. I mean, talking about reframing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, why I had that epiphany where I was like, this is a good thing, you know, because plenty of people on there were not thrilled.
Yeah, we're pissed.
And a lot of them, you know, weren't, I don't know if they stayed sober or whatever. And a lot of them were really ashamed of it. Like, they were like, okay, I'll be your friend on Facebook, but like, don't tag me in anything that has to do with the chain gang. And I was just like, so I was like, I used to post every day. I was like, off to the chain gang. Like, and I'd post like pictures of shit I saw.
Yeah, group photo.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't blow anyone's fucking anonymity, but it's like, I take pictures from the back of like people, our uniforms, or like, you know, like, you know, graffiti or things I found on the street. And I was really honest about what happened, and people rallied behind me on Facebook. They loved it. They were like, these are my favorite posts ever. And when I finished, they were like, get arrested again. That was hilarious.
That's funny.
I was like, yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, no thanks.
So,
well, and I asked about the fifth step. You know, I didn't want to, I think a lot of the times, like in 12-step programs and just in recovery in general, we try to maybe like whittle things down, like past mistakes or why something didn't work out in the past, to like, well, they just weren't as thorough on their 4th step, you know, or something like that.
It's never that easy. I don't think it's ever that clear cut. I was always really honest and thorough, you know, but I think that I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. No, I get that. And, you know, so and I did want to ask you about this, and I think you just used an interesting term, and a term I really like, you know, as a coach as well, reframing, you know, and so like you had said, you're a chronic relapser. And one thing I've noticed is that, and you were talking about like living as the person you wanted to be. The thing that I've noticed is about people that say they're chronic relapsers is like, if you kind of notice a lot of the times, you know, people that are in 12-step programs, and when you're in the rooms, you see these people and they'll say, I'm a chronic relapser. I'm a chronic relapser. And it's like, well, what happens? They keep relapsing.
Of course, it's a label. And that's something definitely like I saw with being crazy. I'm like, I'm crazy. And it was like, or I'm a sex addict. And it gave me permission to keep acting out all those behaviors. Cause I was like, well, what, you know, what do you expect? I'm blah, blah, blah. I'm a drug addict. It's like, so I think that I stopped doing stand-up. And I really just was like, I have to completely, like, you know, stand-up was about sort of like, what's broken about you is really funny. And I was like, I need to completely like reorganize the way that I'm looking at myself and life.
That makes sense.
And so also when you're, you know, trying to get through a criminal trial and a divorce, you're not like, I gotta do a tight 10 minutes at the store at 11. You know, you're your priorities are different, you know. I was like, I need to get sober and not go to prison. Like, how do I do that and like survive financially? But yeah, I think that, you know, I still call myself an addict or a junkie, and people have weird stuff around that. But it, you know, I see my addict's behavior in everything I do still 7.5 years later. I see it in everything. And in some ways, it's a really good thing. If you can really rein that sort of intensity and compulsivity, you can accomplish really cool stuff. If you don't really keep a tight rein, then it's like, you know, then you're off to weird direction.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen that.
And
100%.
ruminating, spinning out, and looking on, you know, eBay for, you know, 5 hours for the perfect vintage T-shirt or whatever weird shit.
I get it. Yeah. I get it. No, absolutely. Well, and so you mentioned a minute ago, like, and I know you do speak a lot about the science behind addiction and how we can rewire the brain, you know, through action. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, why do you think that's important? Just knowing
I think that's important because, well, first of all, what I've learned through doing a lot of writing, especially Dr. Howard Wetzman, who's an addictionologist, a psychiatrist who owned a rehab, who's also sober, many of us have we're born with low dopamine tone. We don't have enough dopamine, there's an actual mutation called MTHFR, and you can get tested for it. And of course I have it. where you don't have enough of the enzyme to break down folic acid from like green veggies into L-methylfolate, which is the building block for serotonin and dopamine. So you can't ever really, you're always kind of at a dopamine deficit.
Okay.
So then, of course, you're searching for things that give you dopamine. What gives you dopamine? Sex, attention, drugs, nicotine, food, sugar, gambling, like, all that kind of stuff, but then those kind of things, the addiction stuff throws your dopamine up really high, and then you come crashing down, and then it's this horrible cycle.
Wow.
So one of the other things that creates dopamine, although it's not quite so much of a rush as, shooting cocaine, is, connection. And you get a helper's high, helping other people. Like one of the reasons 12-step works is because when you're with other people and you feel connected and you don't feel less than, your dopamine rises, So it's like another thing that lowers your dopamine is shame. When you feel ashamed or someone shames you or you feel less than. So it's so important, I think, that we give ourselves a break. And when people come back in, we treat them with kindness and compassion and inclusivity. And I sign all my books, fuck shame, because shame never got me sober, ever. It just kept me using. I had to make a decision to like forgive myself for all the crappy stuff I did. And so yeah, that's people find exercise, there's other ways, meditation, whatever, but it's like, so I got interested in the science of it too, as someone who suffers from really bad depression and epilepsy. And I started taking an L-methylfolate supplement and all that kind of stuff. And it like helps, but it's not like, nothing's like a cure-all. You know what I mean? Nothing is like, bing,
Yeah.
I had a hard time with sort of the religiosity of 12-step programs. That bothered me as a half-breed Jew. I was like, oh, I don't like that. And I had a hard time too with the idea that like, oh, like it's just by the grace of God, wherein like I've seen so many people die. It's like, oh, God just didn't give a fuck about those people, but he cared about you and saved you. So I felt like also, in terms of like changing your character defects, the idea that a higher power or something outside you is going to remove your character defects is such a fucking addict thinking. Like, I'm going to lay back and do nothing. And you're going to fucking fix it for me. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And it's like, you have to do the work. You do the work. And it's through contrary action. It's like, it's an action-based program. There are plenty of atheists in 12-step. So, I mean.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I know I really didn't get like just looking at the 6th and 7th step. Like not that I didn't understand like what the steps were saying, but I didn't understand really like how to get into that action, and you just said it. Like, I don't know if you've ever listened to Joe and Charlie, but they have these like old speaker
I
tapes.
haven't listened. I've heard great things about them.
Okay. Yeah. So like they did these like really great, like big book studies and step studies and stuff back in the day. And, basically what they were saying is exactly what you just said, like contrary action. So like if being selfish is one of your character defects, which I mean, it is for all of us to some degree, be giving. For me, like if being judgmental is one of your character defects, like give someone a compliment or something.
And it's also like, I have the little, cards, and it has the character defect on one side and the opposite on the other.
Oh,
And,
I've never seen. Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. So I'm like, and it's like a little pack of like note cards and like, and it's easier to do something than it is to not do something. Your brain understands that better. Like, I'm going to be giving today, not I'm going to not be selfish. Like
that's
your brain's
true.
like, I don't really get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's easier to go towards a goal than to not do something.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. And I really appreciate, your honesty with the 12-step stuff, because I've been very open. Like when I was introduced to, AA, I was like, cult, brainwashing.
Oh yeah.
And it just got to a point where, really I was in so much pain that I just felt like I just had to give it an honest shot. And from, and I know different things work for different people, but that's really what ended up working for me. Now I want to ask about
Yeah, I'm
your,
not a fundamentalist at all. I mean, like,
yeah,
I'm very much like, hey, if you get, sober through fucking yoga with goats, like, awesome
right,
for you. Like, I don't
right,
really, Scientology, knock yourself out. Like, I don't
sure,
really care. Like, refuge
hmm,
recovery or I don't care. We're
yeah,
all on the same path. And I think there's way too much infighting in recovery. Like,
oh,
always
for
the
sure,
way. Like,
for
I
sure,
was posting something about harm reduction for the podcast because my co-host Joe Schrank is a clinical social worker. So it's
mm,
like, even though he's sober and abstinent and in the program, he's very much like, you get to determine your treatment. And it's like, so I posted harm reduction, and a lot of 12-step people were like, meh, and
yeah,
it's like, hey man, you can be in 12-step and still support other way modalities
for
of
sure,
whatever. And it's like, also
yeah,
like, and I think that I've just started to have more of an open mind. He's moved the needle for me in terms of, like, absence being the only goal. I don't think that that's necessarily possible for everyone, or necessarily that everyone wants it, which is fine. Like, that's
hmm,
the only thing that I can do. I couldn't do anything else.
yeah,
Like I said, I'm an
yeah,
all or nothing kind of gal. I'm either boning strangers in my bucket in the car, or I'm celibate for 3 years. There's really not that much of a middle ground. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Like, I'm
yeah,
like, oh, okay, like, definitely not good with the moderation at all. And I
yeah,
think that's kind of just addicts in general. We're either like, smoking crystal, or we're like doing CrossFit and vegan. Like, we're
yeah,
just really extremist,
yeah. No, I think
Um,
you're right.
but I think that we need to
Absolutely.
be embrace, like, all modalities, and all kind of get under the same tent. And so it's like, whatever works for you. A lot of times harm reduction does lead to abstinence, and that's cool.
Hmm,
But
hmm.
12-step doesn't work for everyone, and that's cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, your experience is your experience, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be fundamentalist and evangelical about it. Like, it
yeah,
did work for me. That is what worked for me. And, like, the more I dug around in it, the more I realized it was really cognitive behavioral therapy, and that there was actually science, like I told you,
yeah.
about,
There
like,
is
why it
absolutely.
fucking works. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
for sure. For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think, and it can be a tough thing. I know because, like just looking at like, a 12-step program, for instance, like, kind of like, well, I don't want to say cause you did put in the effort, but there are people that come into recovery in general, whether it's a 12-step program or not, and they don't really give the effort, and I was one of those people,
Hmm.
and it didn't work. Go figure. Right. So,
Right.
I mean, but I think that sometimes, not sometimes, I mean, it happens, there are instances where people come in, they give a 12-step program an honest shot, and then people kind of shame them because they say, well, you didn't really
Right.
try
Yeah.
it.
You didn't work. It didn't work for you because you didn't do it right. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that that's kind of like,
Yeah.
maybe
Well,
it doesn't
yeah.
work for everybody. If everyone comes into, trying to attempt recovery with a totally different bag of issues.
Hmm.
People have PTSD, people have, childhood sexual abuse, people have mental illness, people have all kinds of stuff. You know what I mean? Some
Yep.
people just have alcoholism, some people have the genetics, some people it was, it developed over, from a pain, from an injury. Like, everyone's thing is different. So and that's the problem, I think, with treatment, is that as someone who's been in treatment 7 times, yay, um, it's not personalized enough. You're taking all these people with different issues and
Yeah.
sticking them in the same groups.
Yeah.
Anger management and sex addiction and relapse prevention and blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's wherein everyone's thing is very different. I
Hmm.
just wrote a piece, Joe and I wrote a piece about racism in treatment and recovery. And, what I found was that a lot of people of color who end up in treatment, there are no Black counselors. No one understands their experience of being Black in America, or the trauma of that, or the trauma with the police, the PTSD they have from the, you know what I mean? And they're told that's not part of their alcoholism, but
Right.
incest and poverty is, like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think
Yeah.
we have a lot of work to do,
For sure. No, and I even mentioned that on episode recently, just that, my thoughts on like 12 steps being the only way has definitely changed. And I mean,
Yeah, for
even
me too.
part of the reason that I got into doing a recovery podcast is because I really wanted to hear different
Yeah.
people's takes on stuff. And I still like, I go back and forth on certain things, like I mentioned recently, like certain types of harm reduction that I hear about, like, for instance, like, I saw recently that over in the UK, they had started with heroin addicts, like giving heroin addicts like state funded heroin. And
Right.
it's like, okay, so I see like on one hand, like they're getting clean needles, and stuff like that. But then it's like, man, is that, and not to get into that too much, but that's just kind of some of the stuff I'm just like, I personally, I don't know
I
about
don't
that.
know enough about harm reduction. We're going to have a harm reduction expert on the
That's a great idea.
on the podcast.
Yeah,
I
that's a
mean,
great
like
idea.
it's like I understand that for some people it looks like an excuse to keep using
Hmm.
and that kind of stuff, but I also think that you've got to keep people alive long enough to find recovery
Oh,
or
for
even just
sure.
have a life that there that could be functional.
For sure.
And also I think that you're not gonna stop people from using just because
No.
they'll use other people's needles, they'll
Yep.
buy stuff off the street. So the whole thing is like, how do we make sure it's not cut with fentanyl and people don't die? How do
Yeah.
we cut down on the spread of HIV and Hep C and that kind of stuff? You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
And let me be clear. Like before I got sober, I did several outpatient, detoxes, quote unquote, for Suboxone, where I was just going, like I wasn't sticking around for any of the meetings or counseling, of course,
Right.
getting the medication and then
Fucking
taking
bailing,
off.
right.
But I think if anything, it probably kept me, maybe from an overdose.
For sure. Oh no, the
Um,
stats show it keeps people from no. I've never been on Suboxone and I wasn't a heroin addict. I was
yeah.
like a cocaine and meth freak and an
Mm,
alcoholic. I just didn't like it.
yeah.
I smoked it once and I fell asleep and I was like, this is boring.
Yeah.
Bye. Like,
Yeah. No, I was a pain pill guy. Love those, love the pain pills, but
yeah, pain oxy made
yeah.
me really aggressive. It made
Yeah.
me really it chilled a lot of people out. I'm like screaming at people in parking lots and karate chopping people and pulling knives. I'm like, I thought it's supposed to mellow you out. Like,
Yeah.
what's up?
Had the opposite
Yeah, it
opposite
made me
effect.
really
Shot
nuts.
that dopamine up way too high.
Yeah, it made me really aggressive
Yeah.
and weird. I was like,
Yeah. Well,
so
so I do want to ask about your memoir, My Fair Junkie. So how did you decide to write a book? How did you decide to write about your story? Like, how did all that come about?
I was writing for thefix.com, an
Okay,
addiction
yeah.
recovery magazine. I'd
Hmm.
been a contributor, like a freelance writer for them for I don't know 6 years maybe
Okay.
writing, and so sort of I was chronicling what was going on as it was going on. I mean, I started in 2012, um, and then I'd always wanted to write a book, but I wasn't sure how to frame it because
Okay.
addiction, everyone wants the sort of like linear thing of like, oh, you hit a bottom and then you like get sober and your life's
Right.
great. And
Right.
it's like I had, as someone who had relapsed a lot, I had so many bottoms and and I was like, how that's going to be really repetitive.
Hmm.
And publishers want a narrative arc. They want a nice, clean narrative arc.
Right. The
And I was
hero
like, well,
story.
yeah, I was like, right. And it's like, well, I mean, addiction is repetitive. It's boring.
It
You know what I
is.
mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna get clean. I relapsed. I'm gonna get
Hmm.
clean again. I relapsed. I mean, it's like it's the same. It's fucking Groundhog's Day. And
Yeah.
so, how was I gonna make that interesting? And so, once I got arrested, and I started doing the community labor, my editor at the time was like, that's your book, that's the framework for your book is the community labor, and then you could flash back to all your times using and
Mm.
and I was like, oh, that's a good idea.
That's
And
pretty cool. Yeah.
so I had a friend, Amber Tozer, who wrote Sober Stick Figure, and she was sober in a comic, and she just got in a book deal, and I said, would you mind passing on some of my articles to your agent? And I said, I have an idea for a book. And he was like, oh my God, I love your writing. And I'm like, really? And he was like, yeah. He's like, let's get on the phone. And I was like, okay. He's like, pitch me your book idea. I'm like, okay. So like I pitched him the idea and he was like, I love it. Write the first, 3 chapters. And I was like, okay. And so I had been chronicling stuff for a long time. So I had like 5, like a true fucking, tweaker and cokehead. I had like 5 different, manuscripts of my book, and I'd been chronicling stuff forever. Not like journaling. I don't like journaling.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like trying to write a book. And so I had a lot of the material, and I had a lot of the material from my articles also. And so I put it together and I sent it to him, and he was like, oh my God, slow the fuck down. Like, this has got to be like, it's got to be more novelistic. It's not just you going through your life. Like, you have people who come in and we never see them again. Like, just so alcoholic, right? Like, who cares about that character? It's all about me,
Right.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he was like, we need returning characters and you need to flesh it out and slow it down. And I was like, okay. So I rewrote it and fleshed it out and slowed it down. He was like, great. Now write the proposal. So then I wrote the proposal and then we sold it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so what has the response been to the book?
I don't read the shitty reviews because I'm too sensitive. Mostly a lot of people have written to me and said it fucking changed their life. They were just like, thank you for being so honest.
Wow, that's
like
awesome.
It's funny and it's really honest. I mean, there's stuff in there that's just mortifying. And I was like, I really had a moment right before I published it, and I was like, am I ever gonna get laid again if I write this book? Like, fuck. I'm like, God, like, what are people gonna think about me?
Yeah.
Like, it's so honest. And I was just like, well, I'm here, I'm writing it to help people, so who gives a fuck? I've saved souls, who cares if I ever get laid again? It's like,
exactly.
No, but people were like, thank you for making me laugh about stuff that I was so ashamed of. Thank you for making me feel less alone and less broken and being so goddamn honest about it all. And it has good rating on Amazon. It's done well. It's helped a lot of people. It's used in a lot of clinics. I've heard people have been like, which is cool. Awesome. I don't really know. I'm not one of those people who checks the Amazon rating all the, you know what I mean? Like, I just kind of like put my baby out there, and I continue to encourage people to read it. And, it's a very honest memoir for a woman to talk about being a perpetrator of domestic violence and a sex addict and a drug addict. And you know what I mean? It's people are like, well, you seem like an asshole in the book. It's like, well, I was an asshole. I mean, I don't know who else is not an asshole when they're mentally ill and on drugs. Like, where do you have to go if you're not an asshole? If I was an angel, I would have never gotten clean, But I also showed that. I mean, I wanted to be really honest about who I was at the time. I didn't care if I wasn't likable. I cared that I told the truth.
Yeah. No, I like that. Well, and I really just appreciate that anything like, I would say that for me, like, humor is such a big part of my recovery, and just happiness in general. And again, like, when like going back to like, walking into AA or something, like when you're in a meeting and you hear someone describe these like awful fucking situations and laughing about it, and then everyone laughing about it, it's like, man, there's something to that,
Of course.
and
humor is very healing, and it's like, and again, it's the alleviation of shame, and it's the identification. And there's just, I don't think there's a whole lot of addiction memoirs that are funny. And I just really wanted to make sure I was like not self-pitying in it, and that I wanted to be careful to not be triggering either. There's very detailed stuff about shooting up, and I was like, how do I do this in a way where it doesn't look appealing? Because I can't watch people shooting up on television. Like, I had to stop watching Intervention. I get really, really triggered, and I feel like I'm going to throw up, but I also feel like really excited and weird, like my body remembers. So I had to stop watching Intervention. It freaks me the fuck out now. You know what I mean?
I've heard other people say that for sure.
Yeah,
I mean,
in the beginning I loved it, and then I was like, I just was like, oh no.
Yeah, a little much. No, I get that. Well,
even when they take blood, I'm like, I'm just like, I'm like, if you can't find a fucking vein, like
let me get in there.
Yeah,
well, let me show you how
I'll show you Old Faithful, like
So you've mentioned the podcast a couple times. So you recently started the podcast, Rehab Confidential.
Well, I mean,
tell us about it.
So everyone had asked. I was a co-host of Dopey for, I was on Dopey for a bunch of times as just like a guest, recurring guest, and people love me and stuff like that. And I was like, I mean, again, because I would just tell the grossest, most absurd, embarrassing stories. So we started a podcast called Rehab Confidential, where we shoot the shit for about 20 minutes and then we bring on a guest. And we're kind of talking to all kinds of different people. Our 5th episode with Ryan O'Callahan, the NFL lineman who came out as gay, is our 5th guest. We had a sober porn star. We had Dr. Wetzman. We had Sean Paul Mahoney, who's a social worker who's working in the trenches in Portland. We had Chris Taylor, the combat vet who overdosed while he was running for fucking Congress. Like, just really interesting people. We're just trying to hit. I interviewed a transgender friend of mine who's in long-term recovery. We have all kinds of different, professors and just every voice of recovery. I want it all, So yeah, we had some, we're both in our 50s. He's like kind of technologically, and I'm not super great at it. But so we had some sound problems and we used to get yelled at by our sound guy a lot. And he was either like, oh, like I was like, are you eating the mic? Like, what's happening here? Like, I was like, stop moving. I can hear you. Are you chopping wood? Like, what the fuck are you doing, man? I was like, and finally we got our sound right. And we got our format and like, it's starting to like kind of, now we're just trying to do the promotion, which always is hard. That always made me uncomfortable with the book. Like, buy my book. I felt so, I'm Jewish, but it's like, felt very Garmento Jewy, like, hey, buy my book and listen to my podcast. I'm not good at sales. That's just not my thing.
Not your deal.
But you have to do it.
You do. So before we wrap up here, Amy, I want to ask if there is maybe one piece of advice that you'd like to share with the Sober Nation.
I would say don't give up. If I'm an example of that, it's, you can get it no matter how many times you failed, you can get this thing. To not give up. And I guess to the recovery community, I guess what I wish for is more that we come together more in terms of like embracing all the modalities, that it isn't these camps. 12-step versus anti-12-step versus harm reduction versus versus mat and anti-mat, and like I just feel like everyone's trying to recover and however they recover is awesome, and I think there's just really not a place for fundamentalism. Like what works for me, again, I think addiction's so unique and there's such a spectrum of addiction and we're all different, so it's like what works for you doesn't necessarily work for someone, and to respect other people's journey. I think that's what I've come to it with time. I still do what works for me, but I don't push that on other people.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I mean, we've all got to come together for the same cause. Yeah. We're all moving in the same direction here. We all want the same thing.
Yeah.
Stay sober, be happy, live good lives.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's what matters. So that's awesome advice. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Amy.
You can learn me.
Yeah, you can learn more about Amy and connect with her on Instagram. You can find her book, My Fair Junkie, on Amazon. Thanks again for coming on the show, Amy.
Thanks so much for having me.
Be sure to check out the show notes for all the info from today's episode. Sober Nation FM is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Sobriety Engine is a free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. This show is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle while supporting your sobriety, you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And again, whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends, follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. Nation, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.